Hey folks, this is your host, Paul Winkler. Thank you for listening to the show today. Before we get into the content, I want to tell you about a new workshop I'm hosting called Politics and Portfolios: How to Invest During Election Season. You can register for it at paulwinkler.com/politics. A lot of people are worried about the market this year, and I want to help you know what to do. We're going to look at historical data and academic research to explain how markets behave in election years, and we'll use easy-to-read charts and graphs. I'll be live on Friday, February 23rd at 12 o'clock. But if you can't make it live, register anyway, and we'll send you a replay link, so go check it out at paulwinkler.com/politics. Now, here's your show.
Welcome to the Investor Coaching Show, a podcast to help you get an insider's view of the financial world and escape common investment traps. We look at the financial news of the day and help you make sense of it so you can relax about money. And here's your host, Paul Winkler.
And welcome to the Investor Coaching Show. I am Paul Winkler, talking about the world of money and investing, and sometimes we get off the beaten path. As you know, I like to do. That's kind of my thing, to get off the beaten path, because there's a lot more to finances than just investing in the right place. Sometimes you got to get your mind right, because if you look at the research on people and how they do with their finances, they underperform the market in a big way historically, and a lot of it has to do with the psychology. And I'm going to tell you, a lot of it has to do with how our anxiety can kick in at the wrong times. You know, we get all euphoric and excited when the market goes up, and then when the market goes down, we go, oh man, it's going to fall up, I'm going to lose everything, and then we tend to make really bad decisions. And then we also have anxieties about how we earn a living. We have, matter of fact, one of the biggest things that we have regarding our anxiety happens to do with money and our finances. So I have the pleasure this hour, we're going to be talking to a couple of friends of mine, Lindsay Casabella and Lauren Combs, and there they are right there. Okay, so ladies, we are going to talk about anxiety, and you both work as counselors over at the BAB Center in Hendersonville.
Yes.
Yeah, Lauren, go ahead. Why don't you give your background and you have a couple designations behind your name. I'm big on designations, but what do they stand for? Licensed
LPC, MHSP. So licensed professional counselor, mental health service provider.
Okay. And Lindsay?
Yes. So I'm an LCSW, licensed clinical social worker.
Okay. So let's talk about, shall we, anxiety. And, I was just thinking, there's so many things to be anxious about right now. People are worried about melting ice caps, and they're worried about politics. We're going into an election year. They're worried about whether football is actually rigged or not. I mean,
right?
Yes.
So define for me, either one of you that want to take this, define for me what anxiety is and what it leads to. And how prevalent is it? Something that you see? Do you think it's the number one thing that you see in your practice that people come in with?
Yes.
Definitely. Definitely. And actually, I was looking earlier, and statistically, it is the number one mental health diagnosis.
Yeah. I think you're right, because, with the little part-time stuff I do over there, I think that's what I see the most.
Right.
Lauren, how about you?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's a lot of that too is awareness, because how anxiety shows itself. And I think more people are aware of just the symptoms of anxiety now, and they can know that's what that is.
Right.
And so, from that perspective, a lot of people are starting to self-diagnose. They're getting out on the social media and they're self-diagnosing, and that's what I've got.
That's another one.
So
we'll
we may
have to
get.
do.
Let's spend some time on that. I definitely want to spend a little bit of time on that as well. Okay, so define it for me. Kind of give me an idea of what anxiety is. I have my definition. I want to see what yours. My definition, just to throw it out there, is I have a fear of the future. I have a fear of what's coming, And what else would you have to say about that?
It's definitely that, but I would say there's a difference between fear and anxiety. And I describe it this way a lot. So I use this example. If I were to walk into my office, because I have an overwhelming fear of snakes, okay? We'll just use this example. Right?
All right.
So if I were to walk into my office and I open up the door and there's a snake, okay? Immediately I'm going to be overtaken by fear, okay? I really don't know how I would react to that because that's not happened. But I would probably have a couple of different responses. I might either slam my door, run and scream, ask for help. I might freeze.
Fight, flight, freeze.
Right.
Yeah.
I might slowly close the door. But let's say you're there, Paul, at work. You're not really afraid of it. You come and you get the snake. You remove that perceived threat. And the threat is gone. And so what I might do is go back to work, calm down, and just kind of come back to a level place.
So anxiety can be right in the present, not necessarily what's going to happen in the future, but in a way, I'm afraid of what that snake might do, and then what how it might affect me in the future in a way, I
Right.
suppose. But there's a little bit of both. Okay.
But let's say that that's kind of fear, and I come back to that level place, and it doesn't really become, the anxiety kind of decreases. It doesn't really become anxiety. But let's say that I'm so shook up that I have to leave for the day and I go home and then I begin to think on it and think on it and worry. And then I begin to just think, what if there's more? What if that snake had baby snakes?
Yeah, no, and I love what you're saying there, Lindsay,
Right.
because, I think in terms of not only do I fear what might happen in a way, and you're saying that I just might be a little bit freaked out about it or
Right.
whatever term you want to use, but it's that I can't handle
Right.
what is coming down
That's
the road.
right. And so then I begin to think on it and it grows and it grows. And then the next day I might call in because I'm so afraid.
Can't go to work.
Right.
Yeah.
Of that perceived threat. Even though I know that maybe it was removed, I'm so the fear is overtaken. And I begin to just think and think and think on it and then follow that by my behaviors or my actions of I'm going to avoid it.
Oh, so I like that. It's kind of like the rumination thing. I
Right.
remember somebody I was actually talking about anxiety, depression was saying that 100% of, the numbers, I mean, we can argue about that, but it was 100% of depression, anxiety is due to our self-talk. And the fact that we keep replaying these risks over and over and saying to ourselves, I can't handle it. I'm not going to be able to deal with this is the rumination part. So that's really interesting. So when we're dealing with these things, okay, what do you do? What are some of the things that you think about in terms of helping people with this? Lauren, what do you want to?
It depends on the age group because I work with much younger kids than she does.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I work from 6 years old and up. So if I'm seeing a kid versus a teenager versus, a young woman, that's my general population that I work with. Not couples or anything like that. It really just depends. But a lot of learning about mindfulness, relaxation techniques, for little kids, I always want to let them know, like, the more education you have of what's going on in your body, what's going on in your mind, in your brain right now, when this is happening, it helps you separate from that big scary monster that it feels like.
So a lot of the stuff, we talk about what is mindfulness? I mean, that's a term that maybe is lost on people. What is it?
I think it can be different techniques that are used for a lot of people. Grounding, a lot of safe place.
Now, safe place for some people is like, what on earth is that? The attachment idea. We have people. Is there somebody? And I think, Lindsay, you actually referred to that in just a second ago in a different way. Do I have somebody that's going to come in there and come to the rescue?
Right.
And do I know that somebody has my back and that can help me take care of things? A lot of people don't have that, but having somebody there with you. I know there was a study I remember where you had two people and they didn't know each other, and the one was there by the person's side, and they responded to the threat completely differently than if the person had somebody that was there very familiar to them right by their side. So that's yeah. If you have somebody that you know, and they actually measured bodily, how your responses were to threats. So I think it's really important. I think that leads to thinking about how much we have people around us and making sure that we are surrounded with people and that we have a support network.
Yes,
definitely.
Because people are isolating nowadays more and more. You want to talk a little bit about that, how we just don't have that. Have you found that as people get older, or is it in general that people are isolating more?
I think COVID too really did a number on not only kids worrying about, they already have those pressures of friends and everything, but that doesn't go away when we grow up, right?
Yeah.
We still can struggle with needing community, obviously. But I think COVID really did a big number on a lot of anxiety.
Right.
And also people feeling like they're connected to others. And then we have social media too. That's a whole other way people feel connected, but then
but very disconnected at the same time because it's fake connection in so many different ways.
Yes.
Now you mentioned, Lauren, you were talking about feeling it in your body. As some people have stress and they don't recognize that a lot of the bodily, a lot of the diseases that we have. I was blown away by, ACEs. Adverse childhood, experiences.
The higher your score,
And, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, tumors, and those types of things. But talk about a little bit more what you're talking about when you say that, where do you express it? And why does that matter if you recognize that? Why does it matter for you to actually identify, where am I kind of feeling this stress?
Yeah, we were actually talking about this the other day, how we see so much, I don't know if you want to say it at the same time too, but so much fear, surrounded by the bodily, whether that's they get nauseous, they're hyperventilating, they're shaking, crying, just the different symptoms that you can have. But we were talking about how common we've been seeing a lot of the fear of throwing up, or people who struggle with anxiety, just having that. That's the body.
The mind-gut connection.
Mind and gut, yes, exactly.
And the fear of the actual body sensations of anxiety.
Which no one wants that, right?
So they fear it, and then it's kind of like, I heard somebody talking about anxiety the other day, and I thought, and this sounds like maybe what you're saying, is sometimes what we do is don't think about it, don't think about it, don't think about it. And what happens when you say, don't think about the thing that you're fearing, your brain says, ooh, this must be really bad.
Yeah.
Yes.
My host, the person is telling me not to think about this.
Yes.
And it might be super. So in essence, one of the things that you guys do, when people come and talk about these types of things, you give voice to the things that I'm worried about, and that helps people overcome some of those fears and anxious types of things that they're going through.
As well as education. So if you have someone who knows what's going on in their body, they go, I can separate my brain and anxiety brain, so to speak, of what's running the show at the moment. Because then it doesn't feel like, it's just me and I've, quote unquote, crazy. That's what people say.
Right. And then to learn that you actually can do something about the body.
Yes.
And what is happening from the anxiety. To realize, because anxiety is a disorder where you feel completely out of control sometimes. And so just helping someone to understand and take back some of that control, that there is a very neurological piece to anxiety, but there are parts that we can control and work on through.
I got to know how.
Learning how to breathe. And that seems so simple. And, sometimes I feel like a lot of people just kind of roll their eyes at that, like, yes. The whole mindfulness, the whole breathing thing.
Right. It's foo-foo stuff. And I get it. Yeah,
right.
I get it.
But there is so much science. It's so much deeper than that. And so learning how to just properly breathe and learning how to recognize the things that often trigger anxiety. And then learning how to recognize the first kind of symptoms, what's happening in my body. And learning then how to cope with that, put in tools that we often teach, help someone to get a sense of control back.
Okay, so when we talk about how to breathe, say, well, why is breathing a big deal? Just if you think about it, you don't think about it. In other words, when it comes to breathing, you don't think about it. And when you bring it to the conscious thought, it has an effect on overall anxiety, because you're taking something that is typically not something you're ever thinking about and making it conscious. But when you talk about breathing, what kind of things would you be telling somebody to do that help with anxiety in general?
Well, the first thing is, because I hear this a lot, like when I'm in the middle of panicking or anxiety, breathing doesn't work for me. And so... Yes.
Address that.
Yes.
Really. Yeah, seriously, go.
So one thing that's important is learning how to practice these things when you're calm. Learning to implement them not in the moment, but when you're actually in a state of feeling calm.
Yes.
Because if you practice them in that state, you're much more likely to naturally implement them when you're feeling heightened.
And be less likely to get to that heightened state, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
Yeah, go ahead.
It feels more natural. It feels more comfortable. Of course, if you're in the middle of a huge panic attack and, you're at a 10, so to speak, like you're not going to feel comfortable trying to focus on your breathing in that moment. If you haven't practiced it, it's going to feel weird. It's going to feel odd versus something you've practiced.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. So let's say that you've done that. You kind of you understand a little bit about breathing. And what breathing, I guess you probably should give some tips that you typically give people on breathing. What would those be before we head to a break? What would be some of the tips that you would give people on, I know how to breathe. Come on. What are you talking about? I've been doing it my whole life.
Well, I think for me, one of the most important things that I like to teach is that you always want, when you exhale, when you're breathing, you want to get a deep breath that's not shallow, but all the way down, deep in your diaphragm. So
make your belly go out.
That's right.
Ladies, you're not going to look, you're not going to have that little tiny stomach that you want when you're doing that. But, breathe out from there. Sure.
But one of the important things is the exhale needs to be longer. You want that to be slow and much longer.
Yeah, and I think about that as you say that. One of the things that I've had people do is challenge the things that they are anxious about, the things that they're thinking about, the negative thoughts. Start to challenge that. I'm sure you guys do that.
Yes.
What does that look like? When you just give me an example of how you might have somebody challenge something.
Coming from a therapy perspective, like using CBT, or are you wanting me to break that down?
Yeah, let's use CBT. Yeah, cognitive behavioral therapy. How do you challenge them? Yeah, for sure. Yeah, let's use that as an example.
So a lot of times I like to, again, depending on the age that I'm working with, I love to go through, let's say it's a teenager or a young kid. I like to go through and go, okay, let's get a list of the things that really trigger your anxiety. What is a 5?
Have them write it down.
Right.
Number one. Yes. And then have them do a ranking of it from a scale of 1 to 10.
1 to 10. So then I know, hey, when you were talking about this one situation, is that a 5? Is that a 7, 10? Where are you at with that? That helps me to know no one else is in their shoes but them. What is their ranking of that? How much fear is coming up for them, anxiety and panic? So
come up with the thing that you're worried about. And let's say if it's a listener and they're thinking, I'm worried that the stock market is going to crash and I'm going to lose all my money and I'm going to be living under a bridge someplace. So to me, let's use that as an example, because people do generally worry that everything is going to fall apart. They're going to lose all their money.
Fortune telling error. Yes.
Right.
That thinking.
Yeah, go.
Yes.
So you would walk them through it how?
Do you want to go with this one?
Or do you want me to go with it? Because
I was gonna say,
and I may just let me just start you off, because I don't want you to walk into how the market works. But what are number one? I would think of what are the odds of this thing that I'm worried about happening. What would it take for that to happen? And I'll give a practical example. I don't know if you guys come up with anything else, but when people worry about the stock market crashing, I go, okay, so you own 30,000 stocks in your investment portfolio, and you're worried about 30,000 companies all around the world, in every country around the world, simultaneously going bankrupt. And if they do, that means earnings have gone away. If earnings go away, then taxes go away. If taxes go away, then the government goes away. And if the government goes away, then the FDIC goes away, and your CDs are worth nothing.
Connected.
But you see where I'm coming from?
Yes.
Yeah. So give an example from your world, what you would do with somebody that is maybe worried about something else. Like maybe a teenager that's worried about failing a test or something like that. How would you walk them through that fear and that anxiety about their possible not being able or failing out, and then what happens next, and go through that.
Right. No, I love that point you made. I like to go through, like if it's a teenager struggling with that, to almost desensitize by going, what's the worst that could happen?
Right.
And I know that sounds really simple, but you need to be also walking through a professional who knows what they're doing with that to help you with relaxation coping skills and helping you calm at that moment, to learn to do that, to use at home. Because if not, then your anxiety starts, the stock market's going to crash. It starts getting really high. And then
I really like the word you just used, desensitize, I think is absolutely major.
I agree.
Go ahead, Lindsay.
I agree, because one thing, I love CBT, but one of the parts that I love about it is somewhat the exposure part.
Yes. Yeah. Exposure. And just to give you an example, folks, so what she's talking about there, I'm afraid of spiders. So you little by little, go ahead.
That's right. So I go back to my beginning example of my snake. Okay. And so if I go home and I continue to just let that build and build and build, and I don't come to work the next day.
Yeah.
And the thoughts continue to just build in my mind. And then I end up just saying, I can't do this. I quit my job.
I can't go to work.
Right.
I can't go to work.
Right.
Then I'm just reinforcing that anxiety over and over and over.
Yes.
But let's say,
I knew I should have been scared of that.
That's right. Let's say I do it afraid. The next day I get up. I may be very worried about opening that door. But I go in, I sit down. I may be very hypervigilant the rest of the day.
Right.
That,
on edge.
Yes, on edge. But I make it through that day.
Let's do this.
I've
Let's
done
take a
it
quick break. We got to run to a break real quick here. Let's do this. We'll come back right after this. You're listening to the Investor Coaching Show. We're talking about how do you deal with anxiety, because there's so much to be anxious about right now, and we have to figure out ways to overcome this stuff. Here with Lindsay Casabella and Lauren Combs over at the Babb Center in Hendersonville, Tennessee. Be back right after this. Thanks for tuning in to the Investor Coaching Podcast. Now, you may be one of these people that's been listening and realizing, wow, investing, there's a lot more to it than meets the eye, and financial planning, tax laws constantly changing, and recognizing that maybe you might need some help in this area, but you don't want just anybody to help you out. So we have 10 offices in the Middle Tennessee area, and everything we do is fee only. We align our interests with your interests. So you can get an initial 15-minute phone call with any one of our offices just by going to paulwinkler.com/call. That's it. Every one of the offices is run by somebody with 20 plus years experience. They're all degreed planners. They all have academic backgrounds in investing, and you can get the help that you need. So if you want to set up a complimentary phone consultation, just go to paulwinkler.com/call. And we look forward to seeing you soon. All right. We're back here on the Investor Coaching Show. I am Paul Winkler, along with some of my friends over there. Lindsay Casabella and Lauren Combs from the Babb Center in Hendersonville, Tennessee. They're counselors over there. And I just thought it'd be kind of fun to talk a little bit about anxiety, because we're going into a year well, there's a huge amount of anxiety, so many things to worry about. What's going to happen? Who's going to be president? Who's going to be vice? Who's going to be, oh my goodness, who's whatever. There's so much stuff. And then what's going to happen to the stock market? And people worry about all of these different things. And I thought it'd be nice to have some tools. And we were talking a little bit about, okay, so we talk about cognitive behavioral therapy for dealing with anxiety and the idea that, so often our anxiety comes from the middle part of our brain, which is the emotional part of our brain. And we're trying to engage the front part, which is the thinking part of the brain, right?
Right.
And what we do, we talked and just before the break, we were talking a little bit about how exposure, what you're doing is running a person through, and for lack of a better word, I'm going to call it a what if scenario.
Right.
So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So going back to kind of what I was saying, if I am afraid and I begin to avoid something,
right,
I'm reinforcing the anxiety.
Yeah, it must be really, really dangerous. So,
Right.
because I'm avoiding it. Yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so if I tell clients this all the time, sometimes we just have to do it afraid.
Yes.
And
I love that.
yes, and they'll look at me and say, "That's simple, like do it afraid." And I'm like, "Yes." Sometimes
Yeah,
we just
feel
have to
the
do
fear.
it afraid.
Yep.
Feel the fear
And do it anyway.
and do it anyways. Because you begin to desensitize yourself, and the more that you do that. So going back to my example that I was continuing to talk about the snake.
Yeah.
If I show up the next day
Yeah.
to work and I might be really afraid, but I make it through that day.
Yeah.
I come back, I do it the next day.
Yeah.
I do it the next day. A month down the road,
Yeah.
that fear is probably going to be gone.
It's extinguished.
That's right.
So a real life example. Ready for this?
Yes.
I was worried about a leak under the house. I don't know if you've ever gone in a crawl space under a house.
No.
It's, you got spiders, you got snakes, you got rodents, you
no.
got, Lord only knows what's under that thing. And true story, about a week ago, I did this. And I went in, I was about 20 feet. And I was like I was looking and go, oh man, that's a long ways. Because I have to go like 30 yards. No exaggeration to get to where I had to go to. And I'm seeing ductwork and I'm going, that ductwork's like really low. Paul, just keep going. And you're right. That's exactly what happened.
Right.
I just kept telling myself, feel the fear
Right.
and just do it anyway. By the time I was done, I wanted to go under there again.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, this isn't nearly as bad. But, it's funny, but we don't think about that. If we face the fear, the
Right.
fear dies.
Right.
Yes.
That's right.
So true. So, okay. So that's a good one. Now, the what if kind of thinking, and who is coming up with this what if scenario? Who's coming up with these things? When you're having, are you telling the person what they're afraid of or walk through that?
No.
Right.
What's
No.
going on there?
Definitely the client.
Yes. Everyone's different. Everyone's
Right.
fear is different. But I also want to echo that a lot of anxiety, it can have certain things that are big fears for a lot of people. They're not alone in that. Like, for example, again, I had mentioned it earlier, a fear of maybe embarrassing themselves by getting sick in public.
I think that I looked up the top 10 things that people are afraid of.
Oh,
You ready for this?
Please tell us.
Yeah.
Yes.
You got money and finances is number one.
Yes.
Is it?
Yep, money and finance. Health and safety of loved ones
Yeah.
Yes.
was number 2. Job and career worries was number 3. Relationship problems.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, people fear. They fear anxiety and depression.
Definitely.
And anxiety. So what's the relationship between anxiety and depression? Because we see a lot of depression right now. What is it, and what are you doing to deal with that?
Yeah, I was going to say they have a very, what's called a high comorbidity. So if you have anxiety, you're much more likely to have some depression in there and vice versa. But you have to think, if you're at a 10, like I was referring to that thermometer kind of where we're at, if you're at a 10 all the time and you're so anxious, you're not able to be very present and living your life. Your body's in overdrive, your mind's in overdrive. And that in turn starts to affect you both in your physical self and in your mental self. And
Right.
And it affects relationships. Think about the
Absolutely.
anxiety
Yeah.
when it becomes hopeless becomes depression.
Yes, and then it just
when it
goes
goes
from there.
depression, it can become to apathy.
Right.
And how much apathy we're seeing right now. I don't care anymore. I don't care. I don't care about anything.
I'm a burden.
Yeah.
I hear that one all the time.
Yes.
It makes
Do
me
you
sad.
really?
Yeah. Yeah. Really sad. Yeah. And that's,
Oh,
Yeah.
if you're a parent, you're dealing with that. Okay, you just hit something right here. What are you saying to your kids when you hear that kind of thing? Because kids feel that way. What and what kind of a message would you want to tell a parent who might be dealing with that? Their kids dealing with anxiety, depression, concerns. What types of things are you talking about? How to deal with this? What would you do?
yeah. If we get to that point and they're saying those kinds of things, that's when I definitely say, hey, it's time to get a counselor, someone who knows what they're doing, how to treat this, and to walk alongside this person, especially let's say it's a teenager. If they are every day affected so deeply by this, and you're noticing personality changes, maybe their sleeping is off, their eating is not how it was, that's definitely a time to go, hey, we need some professional help.
Hey, this is Paul Winkler. Hope you enjoyed today's edition of the Investor Coaching Show. You want to learn more about what we do, go to our website, paulwinkler.com. You can watch some of the videos there, and if you're not already a client, you can set up a free initial consultation. Until next time, I'm Paul Winkler, reminding you that I believe that more educated investors are more confident investors, and confident investors are more successful investors. Have a great one. Advisory services offered through Paul Winkler, Inc., an SEC-registered investment advisor. The opinions voiced and information provided in this material are for general informational purposes only and not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine what investments are appropriate for you, please consult with a financial advisor. Paul Winkler, Inc. does not provide tax or legal advice. Please consult your tax or legal advisor regarding your particular situation.